Hi, Andrea and Caroline.
Hi, they
How
couldn't
are you
get rid
guys
of it.
doing?
Yeah, well, we're back.
Familiar faces. So I can't think of any better people to talk about Fashion Week than the two of you, because the two of you combine both behind the runway and on the runway. And together, combined, the two of you must have years of experience. So, what do you think has changed about Fashion Week? Do you think it is kind of losing relevance a bit, as the title suggests?
No.
Yeah, I mean,
People probably assume we'd say that, but actually we work with a lot of young businesses, and I think people are always surprised at how many businesses we advise not to show. However, is that moment of people coming together and that human interaction still can't be replicated or replaced by technology. And the technology is great. Is that the presentation before is really exciting. It's a great opportunity for our industry to see where it might go. But that human interaction, that idea of coming together, that opportunity to see a collection in full, in motion, is still not possible to replicate in my view.
what do you think, Andrea?
I would say it probably has changed since I started doing shows back in 2010. I don't think it's lost relevance. I do think it has become more of a PR event, and it's opened up a little bit more to the media. And I remember a lot of when I started, a lot of fashion shows weren't letting fashion TV in, and now fashion TV is everywhere. So I think fashion's sort of figuring out that it needs to open up to the public and become a bit more democratic, and a lot of people that view fashion now, view it online. So maybe the role of Fashion Week, I would say, is changing. I would just like to see more of that.
Yeah, because I know Fashion Week used to be such a closed circle, right? It was the designer, models, fashion press, and only the fashion press, and the buyers, and that was it. And then, with technology, the explosion of technology, you got suddenly democratization of Fashion Week.
Yeah.
And some people, of course, were like, why are there paparazzi outside Fashion Week tents? Who are these people in the front row? Who are they? Yeah. So what do you guys think of it? Do you think it's necessarily a good thing that Fashion Week becomes more democratic and open to the public?
I think it's inevitable, is that, the advent of technology, the idea of keeping a really closed shop around an event that creates so much excitement and interest would just have been impossible. So it was definitely the right thing to open it up and let it in, because it would have got out anyway. So the opportunity for businesses to use Fashion Week as a platform to communicate more broadly to a consumer audience about the collections and what they're doing and who the supporters are and who's interested in them has become a really interesting sort of added dynamic to Fashion Week. And what it's meant is that people have started, or businesses have really started to think, what's the purpose of the show? It's a big expense for a business. It's a big sort of marketing spend. And as you said, historically, that return on investment would be judged by the reviews that you got, the media coverage and the number of orders that you would sell to wholesale businesses around the world. Is that now you have what's the social engagement, what's the pre-order opportunity, and many businesses are starting to look at, is it delivering an uplift in store, particularly in their own stores? And when they start to look at the return on investment for shows in that way, that's what's leading them to think about, how do you bring it, the collection that's being seen and all the excitement and noise and hype that's coming out of Fashion Weeks, how do you bring that closer to the end customer? Because they're the ones that are wanting, of course, to feed on that hype and excitement.
Right, because at the end of the day, what happens is you show autumn, winter, but it's not actually happening during autumn or winter. So the seasons are slightly out of joint for the consumer. Do you think that is a challenge to Fashion Week? Do you think that see now, buy now collections are the future, that we shouldn't bother having autumn, winter, spring, summer in the months that we do have them?
Well, I think that some businesses, particularly smaller businesses, the idea of going direct to consumer immediately is a challenge because they don't have that platform, they don't have the opportunity to sell. And many of the sort of growing businesses will still use it as a platform to reach new media outlets, to reach new territories internationally, to reach new partners. So that traditional idea around Fashion Week still definitely is valid. But of course, is that as you start to get sort of a younger audience that's more digitally native, who might have started a Shopify account when they were at college, is that then sort of going to a model where they're not immediately connecting with the consumer is disjointed in a very different way. So it's a really interesting time as businesses figure out the purpose of the show, what the return is that they're looking for, and that's then driving whether they show forward season or in season.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think, Andreja? Because as a model, you've had kind of like an upfront kind of seat to look at the way that Fashion Week has been changing over the years.
I mean, I would love to. I remember when I first, what really kind of got me interested into fashion, and I wasn't interested in fashion until I started working as a model, but I would see those Alexander McQueen shows, in the late 2000s, and it was just like a spectacle. There would be fire everywhere, and models walking on ice, and it just it's such a beautiful artistic experience that was really only seen by editors and by the fashion elite. And then I think that brands, and correct me if I'm wrong, started putting a bit less money into creating such a spectacle of a fashion show, because it is very expensive. But I would love to see that on TV or on YouTube Live, or people really. Why aren't people watching fashion shows? Like they watch a Victoria's Secret runway show. Why aren't there more high-end brands really trying to get an audience watching a creative event that they put on?
What do you think, Caroline? Why is that?
Well, I think is that, as you said, historically is that these shows some of them were just pure theatre. And of course, still, some of them still are today. When you think about the big cruise shows and those moments that you see in Sao Paulo or in Japan or wherever they might be, some in London, is that you see these incredible experiences and everything's put into the stage and the setting. And the same can be said of the likes of the Chanel show, for instance. But that is an enormous expense, and that's a really great branding exercise for the big brands that can afford to do it. But for the smaller businesses, is that it really is, back to this is about, it's a key part of the business. It's showing the collection that's going to generate interest, whether that's for consumers or for a trade audience. But the idea of bringing in, sort of AR to really think about how you take that experience to a bigger audience is one of the things that's really exciting. So if you think about that front row experience, if you could think about that through AR and you could imagine yourself kind of sat next to whichever editor or influencer or supermodel sat on the front row, seeing the collections go by, be able to spin around those collections, look in detail, further down the line, probably be able to touch the fabric to see, what it looks like, and then be able to buy it, then that starts to become a really exciting opportunity, and why you would invest in technology to do that.
Do you think then they'll reach a point where the ideal goal is for everyone to be able to watch any fashion show they want, that there won't be such a thing as exclusivity in Fashion Week anymore, that with technology like AR, anybody could have a front row seat, and that's a good thing? Do you think brands and designers agree with that?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? So you have these sort of moments of digital, and we're at this great sort of digital, the web summit, yet it's all about individual interaction, and it's about the networking and the information that you can get from a sort of human interaction. And I think the same can be said for shows, is that, in the advent of digital, everyone got very excited, and it's live streaming, and how many people can we reach, and what's the audience we can talk to? And I think for many businesses that's relevant. But for some businesses, is they will want to focus on really building the DNA of their brand, keeping that to quite a closed audience, and then releasing that collection in small and really considered ways. And I think is that sometimes when you have such a seismic move, is you get a sort of an alternative reaction, that's sort of the balance and weights. And we're seeing that with some of our younger designers at London Fashion Week that are really wanting to have a closed show for 120 people, and really thinking about who that audience is, and then where the collection will be sold, and how they will then reach the consumer audience through their strategic retail partners.
Mm-hmm. How do models kind of feel about the idea that anyone could attend a runway show and be front row?
For me, I think technology for me is neutral. It doesn't, change the substance, and I think the substance at the end of the day is the creativity that goes into a fashion show, and how good the clothes are, and what's the story you're trying to tell with your show, and the message you're trying to get across, and how relevant it is in this time and age. So, if more people get to view something beautiful, then I think that's just a positive. I think, I think culture and art and fashion should be accessible to majority of people in the world, and that don't have the opportunity to go to a fashion show. So I think that's the way I would look at it. Yeah.
Do you think from the model's perspective, fashion shows have particularly changed in the way that they approach booking models? So for instance, you have to have a certain number of social media followers if you want to land a certain show. Like, do you think that's changing Fashion Week as well? The impetus to book more and more models who have massive followings on social media?
There's that. I wouldn't say that Instagram models have completely replaced traditional models. I think that they've been integrated into high fashion for sure. And it's one of those things, I think when you're living in such a, I guess, 22nd century, of technology, it's important to be authentic, because, I think that a lot of people try and fit a certain mold, or they see you need to have this many followers, and to do that you need to post smiley pictures and bikini shots on your Instagram and get your interaction rate up, and all of these things, I'm not saying are not irrelevant, but I think that what I see is that people lose a lot of authenticity while focusing on these different formulas. Yeah. And I think that a lot of designers do that, lose authenticity and creativity. And I think that's a really important thing you always have to come back to yourself and to what you are as a creative person, because we're not just people on Wall Street trying to make money. We are a creative industry, so I think it's important to come back to the creativity. Yeah.
But I think the same thing could be said of brands, right? You see some brands and they're on Snapchat and you're like, I don't know why you're on Snapchat, because you're a 100-year-old brand. I don't know, and Snapchat is for 13-year-olds. Do you think that in the rush to kind of sign up to every single technology platform or social media app, that brands kind of lose a bit of themselves? They're better off sticking to what they do know, like Fashion Week?
I think is that the use of social channels is becoming really important to brands. And although Snapchat might seem to be something that's not particularly connected with their core customer, is that many businesses, of course, are focused on the fact that they need to make sure that they're inspiring the next generation to come through, and they're not just talking to, the big sister or the mum or whoever it might be in the family. So they have to really think more broadly about who their consumers are and who they're talking to. And we know from the engagement that we get around Fashion Weeks and through our Snapchat channels is that there is so much more engagement because you're talking to a digitally savvy audience. And particularly around Fashion Weeks, where there's so much media focus, is that it does become a platform for to start conversations. Is that we've talked a little bit earlier around sort of the cultural context of the fashion industry and the role it has to play. And Fashion Weeks are often those moments when those discussions really put into sort of laser focus, and that's where a younger audience is really engaged.
Do you think there's something about certain cities, like for instance London, where Fashion Week has taken on a spirit of its own, that London is noticeably different from New York, from Paris, from Milan, and that it has its own kind of thing going on? And do you think that cultivating that kind of special X factor about a Fashion Week is key to longevity?
Yeah, we get approached quite a lot by other cities that are starting Fashion Weeks, and the first thing is that we challenge them is that, so what are you showcasing? Is that what is the real DNA of your city, and therefore that's what you build the platform on. is that I think, particularly for London, is that we're very proud of us having sort of this wealth of young talent, is that we've got years of putting into place support schemes to help them develop, to nurture the creativity at the heart of the business, and to really think about growing those into sustainable businesses. And there seems, because there's that sort of new wave of talent and new excitement coming through, is that many people are always looking at the newness, but also is the sort of the stance that these young businesses are taking in terms of their view on society. And that does play into sort of the casting of models. It plays into the way that they're communicating with the media and the way that they're thinking of building their businesses, which at the moment seems to be a really considered way, because they're thinking about what that means to them as an entrepreneur as well as a designer.
So do you think that the younger generation of, both fashion designers and models still see Fashion Week as being really key to establishing themselves?
Yeah, fundamentally, is that we often think that you have really exciting businesses that you can see being sort of at the heart of streetwear, and or sort of street culture or youth culture, and then they sort of come into the fold, and we're always really surprised when they, and it's not all of them, but there's a core that will say, great, we want to do a show, and you're sort of, why do you want to do a show? You've already got this great business, you've got a really engaged sort of following on social media, you've got a strong e-commerce platform. Is that what will Fashion Week deliver for you? And I think that there is still that ideal that you aspire to be part of a Fashion Week, because that is where sort of the most creative and the most established businesses come together.
Yeah, because it used to be like when it came to models, if you opened an amazing show, that would be it. Your career would just skyrocket.
Right.
But now you don't necessarily need to do that.
Yeah, well, now I think that there used to be a structure with how you develop models and how agents booked models, and they would just sit at a booking table, and usually a Fashion Week, every 2 or 3 years, bringing in a whole heap of new faces and throw them at, the casting directors and basically see what sticks, and see the girl that does all the shows, and then she, then becomes a supermodel. Now I think that models are building themselves up on their own, and the way you build up a model, there are just more opportunities. There's still that, but I think that there are more opportunities. And I would say that the agents and modeling agencies are rapidly in flux at the moment, and sort of changing their business models, because they're having to be real sort of talent managers, like you would maybe find in the world of acting or singing, and not worried just about the girls' campaigns for that season or the girls' shows or editorials, but what does that girl bring to the table? What is her story? What can she do outside of fashion? How can she build herself up as, I guess you can't just be a pretty face anymore. You've got to talk.
Yeah, and I guess that's one thing that's also changed about the models that do get booked for the fashion shows. It's like if you book someone with a strong story, with loads of followers, of a really engaged audience of her own, that will give your show a lift as well.
I think so. I think is that you automatically get sort of the halo effect of having those girls in the show. But I think is that it's also how the brands are working with media around Fashion Weeks, and really thinking about sort of content partnerships. We were talking a little bit backstage about sort of the amount that the digital editors of the magazines have to push out during Fashion Weeks, because there's the backstage stories, there's the trends from there's the reviews of the shows, there's what's happening outside the shows, there's the streetwear scene, and all of that information, that immediacy around that information is really important, that it's kind of brought together the industry to collaborate better and to make sure that there's a sharing of knowledge and information, because that immediacy to get information out during shows is impacting on everybody.
Do you think there's one designer or label out there right now who really nails the essence of Fashion Week and gets completely what it's all about in the 21st century?
Ooh,
tough question.
That's a really tough one, because and that's because I don't think there is sort of one ideal that you're trying to nail, and I think every business has, and if they don't, they should really understand what they're participating in Fashion Week for. So is it sort of the Tommy Hilfiger version where it's entertainment and it's sort of youth culture and getting everyone excited about sort of the hottest young models and them being part of the brand and it being a show, a show, or is it about really focusing on the collection that you're sending down the runway and being sort of very pure to that ideal and focusing on the product? And as I said before, it's really figuring out why you're doing the show. And I think is that you can see when businesses are really focused and they're not sort of pulled in every direction, and that makes that show quite special.
So I guess focus is what makes a good fashion show.
Yeah.
What do you think, Andreja?
Yeah, well, I do think that it's a time, I would say when I started out, fashion was probably a bit more conformist and designers would kind of copy each other a lot, you know what I mean? And there was like a one sort of DNA, throughout Paris, throughout New York, and now I think that brands are kind of doing their own thing and kind of being forced into like creating an identity for themselves. I think like Gucci is a brand that does that really well with really being consistent and Balenciaga, Saint Laurent at the moment. I think that they're definitely. It feels authentic to the designer. It doesn't feel like they're trying to just hop on a trend, on a social media trend, on a diversity trend, because that I think there's a lot of that. I think this moment is sort of pushing brands to be authentic to themselves.
And one last question. Do you guys remember the first ever fashion show you watched or consumed, like in magazines or on TV or something, that really left an impact on you? Because I'm always curious to ask people in the fashion industry what they first remember as being the show that really affected them. I know you said McQueen.
McQueen for sure. Terry McGlare in the 80s. Jean-Paul Gaultier. In the 80s, 90s. More vintage stuff.
Yeah. What about you, Caroline?
So if I think about imagery, if we probably think about that, the Vivienne Westwood couture show where Naomi fell over the platform.
Yes.
There's that sort of, and there's that image of her sort of falling over and the joy and excitement, but also the theatre around that. I remember one of my first fashion weeks was, as a sort of a much younger, didn't have a ticket, blagging my way into the McQueen shows, was kind of a real moment because you felt that and that was part of you felt you had to get in because there was no other way. You were seeing those images, or those reliving those moments, sort of the telling of the tales and the reading the reviews were just never going to be enough. You felt that you had to be there. And then sort of the younger designers, the likes of Gareth Pugh when he was starting out, that was so dramatic in terms of the shows.
Amazing.
And sort of the idea that you don't have the budget that maybe McQueen had at the time, but still you could create that sense of drama and theatre through the collection and the hair and the makeup and the styling.
Yeah, I'd like to see more drama,
Yeah.
Return of drama and a return of glamour.
I think that's the way forward, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's a great note to end on. I'd like to thank Caroline and Andreja for joining us today. Please join me in a round of applause for them. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much.